I see there's been a request for live transcription. I'm happy to enable that, but I do want to make sure we know the limitations of live transcription. Not everything that comes out of our mouths is correctly typed on the screen. And so I'm happy to change and put that on there for you, just making sure that everyone knows the limitations of that service.
Thank you. For those of you who haven't been with us before, Puget Sound College and Career Network is in partnership with PSCCN, and we are a network that builds regional capacity to increase post-secondary readiness. Next slide.
So my name is Christina Winstead, and I'm joined by Sam Washington from the Washington Student Achievement Council. And what we do is we increase advanced educational opportunities in Attainment Washington, and we do this through policies as well as programs like the 12th Year Campaign and OtterBot.
On today's agenda, we'll be going over verification, award letters, appeals and revisions, resources and updates, as well as closing and evaluation. And as mentioned, we'll be happy to answer any questions that may come along the way. So please feel free to check those in the chat at any moment. Next slide, please. By the end of this, we hope to better understand the financial aid process. After submission, we also we'll be reviewing a sample award letter to understand the different components included and access student and family resources related to the financial aid process, and share best practices and strategies for overcoming the current state of things. At this moment, I would like you all to share your name, pronouns, role, and organization in the chat to see who's in the room. And I'll give everyone a couple minutes to do that. Thank you all. I see that Pierce is in the building. Next slide, please.
Okay, so we're going to go over a couple quick resources and updates before we get started on the presentation. The first one is this Padlet. This Padlet has all of the links that you're going to want for today. And in all honesty, we constantly update this. And I'm going to put this in the chat for you. Or actually, it's already in there. Sweet. Okay, so this Padlet, we are always updating, but it has all the links we're going to talk about today and maybe a few more. It has translated resources, but we wanted everything to be in one spot for you when you're serving students in financial aid and in college access in general. And so we've created this Padlet for that. And don't worry, because we also have one for students that will show you at the end that you can actually give that link to your students that has all the steps for financial aid. Next slide, please. So I wanted to give our residency update. Something happened over summer, not just 112-degree heat, but we also had a change of residency, and it's for the best. Our residency in the past, a Washingtonian especially undocumented Washingtonians, had to live in Washington for 3 years prior to graduating and starting college in order to be considered a resident. And that has been shortened down to align with our actual residency requirements, and that is 1 year. So a student can live in Washington for 1 year prior to being assessed for residency in college. So their first, post high school, post-secondary. They assess them for residency, and it's 12 months to 3 years now. In the past, we know we've had students where we sit there and go, oh, they're 2 months off and they won't get residency. This has really changed the game for a lot of our students. The other thing I absolutely love about this is you may have students who you worked with last year who didn't qualify for in-state tuition or for Washington state aid, but because of this change, they do now. So you may have students reaching out to you from previous classes, or you might be working with returning adults who don't realize this amazing change in residency will impact them in a positive way. This flyer here is available, that residency flyer is available in 5 languages on that Padlet. I encourage you to share them with students. The other piece that I wanted to talk about is just a reminder. This is not something new, but a reminder about other select applicants for the state application for financial aid. So in Washington State, we have the WAFSA, the state application for aid that we talked about last week in our financial aid basics trainings. We have 2 different applications. Students only fill out one. But students who qualify for the FAFSA may determine that they want to complete the WASFA instead for a multitude of reasons. The main reasons are listed here. So students who are eligible for the FAFSA, they should apply for FAFSA to really maximize their aid, but it's a personal decision on whether you want to complete a financial aid application. And we're not here to say every student has to complete aid. We're here to say, here are all the opportunities, here's the support, but we can't tell someone they have to apply for aid. I've had families who've decided they don't want to apply for federal aid because of their family status, and they would prefer either to not apply for aid or apply for Washington state aid. So if a student's parents are undocumented or family members don't wish them to file the FAFSA, even though they qualify, they can file the WAFSA. If them or their parents didn't file federal taxes, or have federal student loans that are in default, or owe a repayment on a federal grant, students in those situations can use the WAFSA to access Washington state funding instead of federal funding. So I just wanted to remind us, we have students in all these different situations. As we go through this training today, we're going to have students coming from all different parts of the world to find their post-secondary education. And there's not just one stream of students coming from the high school. We have returning adults. We have all these different student populations, just to inform them of their opportunities. Because I've had students who have told me, like, we're not applying for aid, and this is why, and this has been a pathway for them. Again, a quick reminder, Washington state aid through the WASFA has to be used in the beautiful state of Washington, but why wouldn't you want to? It only rains like 9 months a year. And so we have a great program here. We just want to make sure students are aware of the aid that is theirs. Next slide. And then finally, I get a lot of like, we'll never qualify for aid. And I say that, when I say these things, it's not that I'm trying to make light of the situations our families are in. I was that student that said, we're not qualifying for aid, and I didn't apply. So this is not me trying to make light. It's very serious in the process of applying for aid. Some of the things that stop students. There's a financial aid calculator where someone can put in their family income, the number of people going to college in their family, and the number of people in the household, and it will tell them what they might be eligible for just for Washington state aid. So this doesn't include the federal Pell unless they have their EFC from their financial aid application, but this gives them an estimated award, which can be helpful in explaining to families that really awesome wide range of gift aid that can come from Washington College Grant. Next slide. So now we're going to talk about verification.
All right, next slide, please. If everyone could please put in the chat what your biggest concern or challenge has been when it comes to verification. I know a lot of colleges might not have sent the award letter yet, so you're not sure what those challenges will look like this year. But if there is an area of concern that you have at your organization, we would love to try and answer those concerns right now. Okay, no questions. You guys are all experts. I'm glad to hear that. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in our 101 presentation, if you attended, we did cover some details on verification, but today we'll review what we discussed in Financial Aid 101, because we're really trying to support that idea that verification is part of the financial aid. Oh, I see someone raise their hand.
Hi, I'm sorry, I don't know if this is the right time to ask a question. It was about when you said about the grant. I started to write down my question and, oh no, I think it popped out of my head. Do the students, when you said, of course they're Washington State grants, so is it something like with the VA where they have to take in-person classes if they're awarded?
No, VA stipulations are different from Washington College grant requirements, so they can use those funds to take hybrid or online courses. The format of the course doesn't, or the method of instruction doesn't impact eligibility for aid like it does sometimes with VA programs.
Okay, so even if they go out of state or anything, that's something that's it doesn't affect their,
as long as they're a
award
Washington
status?
So they need to maintain Washington residency because they have to be a Washington resident in order to receive the aid. So they need to maintain state residency requirements.
Okay.
But I do have students who they are taking classes and traveling at the same time. Like they're like doing the best of both worlds. Like I'm gonna take my gap year, but go to school and travel. And I'm like, oh, genius, because they can take all of it online right now. I'm like, oh, amazing. So there is some flexibility as long as they're able to complete their coursework and maintain their residency.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you so much for clarifying that.
Oh, you're welcome.
There we go. As I was mentioning, the verification really is part of the process, and there are priority deadlines that comes with a lot of them, especially with 4 years. So this is a key information. So it's important for us students to, be checking their email, be checking their student portal to see if they get applied for verification. 1 in 3 students usually do. And a couple of reminders is, again, just stressing the fact that verification is part of the application process. Even if a WASFA or FAFSA is successfully submitted, if a student is selected for verification, the application is still not considered complete until all documents or any additional information required by the institution is given. It's normal. You should normalize verification at your district or at your college or at your organization. The more it's incorporated into trainings, event or programming, as well as financial aid presentations you may do to families or communities, the more it can be on their radar, and the more it can be on their radar to complete it by those priority deadlines that are given. If they are selected by verification, if they are selected for verification by institution, they will see a notice in their portal, their student portal, or their email. So once you do complete the application in October or whenever it may be in the school year, that's always a reminder for next steps, right? To watch out for those next couple of months and see what additional items may be needed from this. It is important for the students to monitor as well as the family. And I, really incorporate that they're going to be going to college. This is when they start to take ownership as well. And I'm sure they'll be happy to. Next slide.
Okay, so let's jump into the details of verification. The reality is, and people in this room may have been picked for verification. You may have your own verification experiences. This can be scary for our students. So I'm always very mindful of the student experience in this. Again, students will think that they've done something wrong. They have not. They have been randomly picked by the federal government or their institution, sometimes because they see an error, to address something on their application. So nationally, between 18 and 30% of students are selected for verification. They have tried to work on reducing the number that are picked for verification, but we still hear stories that it's impacting also potentially sometimes lower income students more. And so we want to make sure we're helping our students through this process. This is the first time students are navigating sometimes federal and state processes, and whew, we know how easy they are. So they may need a little extra help. So in this process, students will be selected and they get informed. Like, it's so interesting. Some schools do that portal notification. Some schools will send a postcard. Some send a letter. I don't care if they send a pigeon with a letter tied around their leg that says you've been picked for verification. The reality is, if the student doesn't navigate the process and complete it, the institution is unable to release aid, federal aid, if they haven't completed verification and have been selected. So who can pick this? Federal government. The FAFSA can randomly select a FAFSA for verification. The colleges can do it as well. And I've seen colleges do it because they see something that looks like it could be an error in the application where the student is not receiving the aid that they may be eligible for. For example, I had a student, when they were putting the family income in, the parents put their income and the student went, well, Mom made 32,000 last year and I'm part of the family, that's family income. So I made 32 last year. And so when it came down to the student income section, the student listed that they made 32,000 last year. Now, the financial aid office got the application, looked at it and went, what 17-year-old is making 32,000 last year? I'm in the wrong job. Let's verify this. And so they went through and found out that they had duplicated the income like they had suspected. They were able to remove the student income, which was actually zero, and it put them back in the position to receive gift aid. So they also look at verification as ways to clarify information in a financial aid application. You will also see this when students, to be honest, I've had families who have listed zero assets, but then they have in their taxes a document showing that they're receiving interest income from a savings account. They can use it too to see if there have been any inaccuracies. That's why we tell families we can give guidance on how to fill out the application, but we don't actually fill it out for them. It's their decision on how they want to fill it out. So if they fill it out in a way that's inaccurate, they are going to clarify with verification. Either way, again, if they don't finish the process, and this breaks my heart because I've seen students lose aid over this, and then I lose sleep over it. So if they don't have it completed, they are unable to receive federal aid. Next slide, please. So what are they going to be asking for? And it's, again, really private information. So we want to normalize verification because, again, we went from asking like, hey, can you get your parents' social and how much money they make, like all those private questions. We're going to be asking again for more private documents. So we want to norm this so that families know the verification is a very normal part of the financial aid process. They're commonly going to be asking for tax transcripts, letters of non-filing, sometimes W-2s. And they're really going to look at income is what they're verifying, the number of people in the household, things like that. Next slide, please. So some of the challenges of this, most of them are timing related. And so what happens is students will receive information about being picked for verification, and for a multitude of reasons, they either don't get started on it right away or they get confused, or like I've had students who just get scared. Or the reality is we also have students who are going through imposter syndrome, and I've had students think that this means that this is a sign they shouldn't go to college. That also breaks my heart. So we want to really think about the student mindfully when they're going through this process. No matter why they haven't addressed verification yet, even if they've missed a deadline, I encourage, just treat it very positively. It's okay if they miss a deadline. It's time to reach out to the college to find out what our next steps are. I've had students crumple up their verification letters, stick it in their backpack, and never speak of it again. And what happens then is the student doesn't continue their education, and we know we want them to persist. There's a lot of confusion about what documents to turn in, and we're going to clarify that today. So a lot of people think, I'll just turn in a copy of my taxes. I can just print that up from H&R Block and we're good to go, but it's not the right form that they can receive as part of the verification process. And so just understanding what forms are commonly going to be asked and best practices. And then for those who did not have to file taxes, they're going to get a letter of non-filing. And sometimes students, it takes a little bit of time to get those, or they don't realize they need a letter of non-filing. Also for verification, it's different for those who are dependent versus independent. Dependent students may be asked for verification of their parental income as well. The biggest things to do is check their portals often. Students, check that portal as much as you can, because also they're pushing out scholarship information and other things. And sometimes, spoilers, they're pushing out that because there's a low number of applicants. So if students are getting a lot of push outs about scholarships, sometimes it means that they need more applicants for them. Communicate with the financial aid office. Oh my goodness, they're not psychic. If they were, they might have other jobs than financial aid officers. And until we have a force of psychic financial aid officers, students will have to reach out when they are struggling. Financial aid officers want their students to get this money. It's not like they're sitting there going and finding all these ways to not give students money. It breaks their heart. I've worked in financial aid. We also don't sleep when we can't give this money to students. And so if they're stuck, they just have to reach out to the office and say, I am struggling with this process. Can you help? It never hurts to ask for help. Also, then you get to know the financial aid office and you'll find out they're just really awesome people who want to help out. And then tell students they assume they need to do something if they get a letter. Their financial aid office, you know, they're awesome, but they are not sending out letters to become pen pals with students. They're doing it because there's something they need from the student, and they typically only send one communication of a physical copy. So if they're getting a letter, there's typically something they need to do. Next slide. So let's talk about those documents. Tax transcript is the main document that students will be asked for in the verification process. Same with their parents. They can order it in one of two ways. They can order it online, but here's the challenge with online. If you want to order your tax transcript online, you're going to have to be able to access an ID.me account, which means you have a credit card, sometimes a phone bill, things like that. Not all of our families have that, so there's not access to this portion of it. Don't worry, I'm all about equitable access, and there's another process we'll talk about in a second. The other barrier that might be with this process is they are going to require people to take a selfie to show their identity. And this is this can be concerning for families. So if they don't want to go through that verification process of identity, they can do the mail-in one, and we'll talk about that in a second. The other piece about this one is no matter which process you're using, online or ordering through the mail, there is a delay right now. So the IRS is a little delayed, we know, in the tax process, but also in their process of providing documents like this. So while it says it will take like a 4 week, or like I think it says 10 days on here, it's taking closer to 4 weeks, I've heard from some students. So you want to make sure that you're being mindful of the amount of time it takes. The other challenge I have found personally is that this website does not work real well with assistive and adaptive technology. If you're using an e-reader, it does not read that application well at all. And so you may have students who are using assistive technology that are struggling with access, not just to this, but I tried to do the FAFSA with one, and it's very challenging. So there may be, it may be important to provide additional assistance for students using devices that may have problems connecting with these sites. Next slide, please. So the other way to order that tax transcript is through the mail, which is fine. It says 5 to 10 calendar days. Like I said, it's been taking about a month. This is very easy to do, and you just go right online. The other site, as a heads up, when you're trying to order online, also, if you try to go to that page, it takes about 7 minutes to even enter the page to put the request in. You have to wait to get, just like you're trying to get Ticketmaster tickets back in the day, you just have to wait to get in. It's a hot ticket, it's your IRS forms. So you can also order the document this way. Here is my best practice. When working with families, especially if you're working with like juniors or people who are getting ready for this process, people are filing taxes right now. When you file your taxes, if you are in school or have somebody that is dependent on you in school, order a tax transcript when you file your taxes every year. This is a practice I do even though I'm not even in school right now, just in case someone in my family decides to go to college, we have that document. So I encourage people, it's free to order your tax transcript, file taxes, order the tax transcript, put them together. If you are picked for verification, take that and send it on in. Easy peasy. Next slide. So the biggest things here, acting. As soon as you know those deadlines are real, Now, if a student misses the deadline, still talk to the college because they may be able to provide some sort of assistance. But trying to keep track of those deadlines, as soon as they find out they've been picked for verification, they should start on that process. Again, I want to norm the verification process, but not in a shaming way. No one has done anything wrong. You're just randomly picked. I got picked while working in financial aid. They're like, we need to verify your income. I'm like, I showed up to work today. And they're like, no, we need the paperwork. So it is a formal process. Eventually you will be picked, and a lot of us have our own personal experiences with it. So I want to norm that as much as possible. Again, I also want to remind people though that if they don't finish the process, we can't provide federal aid. And there's a lot of resources to help with this. And so I include this in the timeline of financial aid in any of my presentations. Verification and other documents is included in that timeline. I'd add that to all of your timelines. Next slide. Okay, so discussion questions. We're going to use the chat box for this. So in supporting students in the past, what's worked for you for verification? And what do you need to support your students in this process? Is there something that you're needing that can help you navigate students through? And what questions do you have about verification? We're just going to give people a minute to type those into the chat box. Also, and someone brought this up earlier in a training last week, you may wake up in the middle of the night and have questions about these things. You're like, oh, I wish I had a chat box now. Don't worry, you can still, our contact information is at the end, and we're happy to answer questions later on. I know that these burning questions about financial aid will come up at any point in time. And if there is a situation you want to discuss in here that you don't feel comfortable sharing with the group, especially if it's student identifying, please don't use anything that's student identifying, but please feel free to use the chat box and directly message and let us know that you don't want us to read it in front of the group, but you would like us to address it after the session. Okay. After applying for financial aid, suggesting their tax transcripts for college. Yes. Yeah, definitely get the tax transcripts while you're doing your taxes. Oh my goodness, because our tax year that we're filing for right now is the 23-24 financial aid application tax year. So it's just like if you have sophomores or juniors or any underclassmen ever doing like financial aid information nights, just having that tax transcript so nice.
Carol, I saw that your hand was up. Do you still have a question?
I do. I was thinking, oh, I might not be able to get it in the chat quick enough, like Jerry did. I just have a question about that. The form that I can let students know about if, if they're recently divorced or they, were living with their parents during that time of, what's the name of the form or,
Oh, that's going to be in our next section. That's a good segue because that's our next section where we're going to talk about navigating special circumstances with students.
Oh,
and
perfect.
It's Student Swift. Don't worry, that's perfect. Like it's like we planted you right in the audience.
That's right. I'm a plant, everyone.
That was perfect segue. One thing I did want to add though in the verification before we move on is that last year there were guidances provided that allowed a lot of flexibility in what documents financial aid officers could take to help support the verification process. This year, federal student aid has not provided us with those guidances at this point in time. So they do have to follow the rule of using tax transcripts and those other documents that are required versus some of the flexibilities. If they do provide those flexibilities to us again, which I'm crossing my fingers that they do, I will be putting that in the Padlet, and I usually bump it to the top so you can see it. It will say something along the lines of verification update in big bold letters. So if I do get that guidance, I already have the post ready to go. They just have to give the guidance and I can publish it. But until then, we have to go off of the rules of using those tax transcripts. And if you get stuck with verification at the end, there's a Calendarly thing where you can make appointments with me to ask questions about how to support your students with this. So you still have access no matter what. Perfect. Next up is award letters, something we will be seeing our students receiving here quite a bit. Dinda, do you want to kick it off?
Thank you, Christina. Yeah, so award letters. This would be a good time to start reminding students to start looking in their emails for award letters. And if any students don't receive the award letters in March, they should not start getting distressed or feeling like they might not go to college. Award letters continue to be sent out through May. So students should be in the lookout for these. This is the official notice that schools send out to outline what the student's financial aid package will look like. But one thing to remember is that some schools may have different names for these award letters. Some people might call them financial aid offer, merit letter, award letter, or financial aid package. They all mean the same thing. The key is to make sure that the student is aware of what to be in the lookout for, because they might be looking for award letter and then a financial aid offer has been sent. And here are some key points to remember, especially when working with students and their families, as it relates to financial aid award letters. There's no standard format, so these award letters can look different depending on which school they're coming from. And this can make comparing them, say if you're comparing the student is trying to get into the best school that fits their needs. So comparing these award letters might look different because the award letters are coming from two different schools. But we do have a college financing sheet that should be able to help with that. And then school policies and available resources can impact the aid that the student receives. Private schools, for example, can have a lot more resources for students in awarding school-based grants to students, while state schools and CTCs have a limited amount of resources to award to their students. So that's just something to be mindful of. And then eligibility for certain programs can also impact the student's award. The amount of federal aid, federal grants a student can get is limited to Pell and Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, which is awarded to the lowest income bracket and foster kids. So not everybody can get that type of aid. If the student is eligible for college-bound scholarship, the award may also look different in that sense. And then schools can produce award letters at varying times, like we had talked about. Some award letters arrive with the offer of admission or soon after. Others require verification to be completed. And then another reminder is that it's an offer, right? The award letter is an offer. So the student can request modification if there's a change in their circumstances, or adjust the loan or work expectation, adjust outside aid expectation. So they can even say, no, we don't want the aid. So that is an option that's given to them as well. So here's a couple fun questions just to warm up our understanding of award letters. True or false? Once I receive, this is a student, once I receive my financial aid award letter, I can still appeal for more aid. Please type true or false in the chat. I see everyone has it right. So yes, it is true. One can appeal for more aid. The worst case scenario is that the student or the institutions might say no, but appeals are typically reserved for special circumstances. There's a federal and state guidance on that. So if it doesn't work out the first time, the student can always appeal. Second one. Number 2, your financial aid package award letter should tell you everything except pick one. A, B, C, or D? I haven't seen a wrong one, so I'll assume that everyone is good on this one as well. So yes, a student should apply for financial aid every year, and they will receive a financial aid award letter each year they apply. Yeah, because I was one of those students who thought once you apply, they know that I'm going to school for 4 years. I applied for school for college for 4 years, so they should expect me to need aid every year, but that's not the case. The last one, true or false? If you are Pell Grant eligible, then you are eligible for work study. That's right. True. Work study allows the student to work part-time while attending college. Students will need to assess their whether or not this is a good option for them, because working part-time can also take up a lot of time, and the time that they could be using for studying, for doing their homework, or doing some research, or whatever other school need that they may have. But having said that, students should take advantage of this program, but they should be aware that they need to be able to balance their time accordingly so that their schoolwork doesn't fall behind. And Chapter 4 of this can actually help on understanding financial aid award letters, and will help on this. So some of the components of an award letters are cost of attendance, parent contribution, which is not reflective of what they may be able to contribute, and is not equal to the expected family contribution. And then there are gifts, aid, which are grants and scholarships that the children, the students, sorry, not children, students can sign up for. And then unmet need is also the amount that's left to be paid after financial aid is awarded. And estimated cost of attendance, just to help the student understand what the totality of the cost of going to college is. So there are some indirect costs and direct costs. I remember this past January, my cousin was applying for school, and she's like, all I need is just 12,000. That's all I need to go to school, and I'll be set for the whole year. So then we're like, so where are you going to be living? What are you going to be eating? You know, what are you going to be using for this? And they had not even thought about that. They just needed 12,000 that's listed in the tuition and the breakdown of the school that they didn't think of. For some reason, they're going to starve the whole year. So, so these are some of the indirect and the direct costs associated with going to school. And students and families can break it down this way, where they estimate, they list all the things that they will need for what the school lists as tuition fees, housing, meals, and all these other things. But there are also other things like where they're going to be living and things like that might not be listed under the cost of going to school. And then once they sum that up, it will give them an idea of what's actually needed for the student to go to school. So yeah, that's the breakdown. The first one is direct costs, the meals, the housing, tuitions, and all that. And then the indirect costs are some of the books, the supplies. Maybe they might need a computer, they might need some of the stuff that they might need, transportation and all that other thing. Sam?
Yeah, thanks, Linda. So when we're talking about those costs, the question then becomes, how do students actually pay for everything? And we've been talking about financial aid, but if you attended our 101 training, you will have learned that financial aid is an umbrella term that we use to talk about the different sorts of monies that a student can receive in order to pay for those costs. Now, a couple of those ways of paying for school are bucketed under what's called gift aid. Essentially, it's money that a student receives with no expectation that they pay it back, with the exception of some circumstances, special circumstances, which I'll get into in a little bit. But gift aid encompasses grants and scholarships. This can include the Pell Grant, the Washington College Grant, which Christina talked about a little bit at the beginning of the presentation, and also grants that are provided by the school. There's also scholarships that students can receive that also count as gift aid. These can come from the school as well. Those look like very common ones students acknowledge are like athletic scholarships or performance scholarships. There's ones for academics as well. And then there's also third-party scholarship providers that can award students for any number of reasons. And there are a bunch of different resources that are included in that Padlet that Christina shared on ways that students can search for these third-party scholarships. Now, the one thing that I did want to point out, I mentioned it, the special circumstance, is that occasionally a student may have to pay back part or all of a grant, but this will only typically happen if a student withdraws for school for any reason or needs to take a semester off for whatever reason. So it's really important that when students are receiving their aid, they take a little bit of time to understand where it's coming from and what the rules around it are. Next slide. So after they've taken a look at their gift aid and all of those costs, they'll want to take a look at what their unmet need might be. And the way they can get to that unmet need is by calculating the direct costs, subtracting all of that gift aid that they've received, and then they're left with their net costs, which is that unmet need. Now, there are a variety of ways a student can address that unmet need, and those are bucketed under what some will call self-help aid, those ways that students can, put a little bit of work, a little bit of time, a little bit of effort in on receiving more financial aid in order to cover that unmet need. Go to the next slide. So the unmet need can be addressed in a few different ways. One common way is work study. That's assessed by a student applying for financial aid, whether through the FAFSA or the WASFA application. And as was mentioned, it's a great way for students to work during their schooling to receive funding to go towards school. This is also a great way for students to receive money to address those indirect costs, those things that may come up during the course of a school year that they weren't anticipating, like needing gas to get to and from a new job, or money in their pocket to pay for food if they are cooking for themselves, or they just want to have fun with their friends and go out to grab dinner. Work study is a great opportunity to have students make money on their own while they're in school. And it's a great opportunity for them to build up a little bit of work experience, maybe some resume pieces while they're actually going through their education. That way, by the time they hit graduation, they'll be able to add those pieces to their resume in addition to their degree. Another way students can look at receiving money to address those unmet needs is loans. The reality of the situation is a lot of students, including myself, have taken out or will take out loans to cover that unmet cost. Now, it isn't necessarily a terrible thing to take out loans. The way I like to perceive it is that it's an investment in yourself. Loans are money that are borrowed with the expectation that it's paid back once a student has completed their program. Typically, students will have a grace period once they've graduated to help themselves get established, get into a new job, and get their feet underneath them once they've left their school in order to get things started on their payment plans. Loans are also established and assessed through the FAFSA application, and those can look like subsidized and unsubsidized loans, as well as parent loans. And then last but certainly not least, there's additional other options: family contributions, college savings plans, military VA benefits, other things like that can come together to cover that unmet cost for a student. As was mentioned, the EFC, the expected family contribution, isn't an exact amount that a family should put towards their student's education. However, it is a good kind of ballpark about what a student can expect to need support with as they move forward. Another great way to work on those unmet costs are to check out those different scholarship websites that we mentioned that are included on your Padlet. Even if you're working with students who are as young as freshman student in a high school, they can start looking for scholarships now and start working on accumulating that pot of money. So that way, when they go off to school, they've already got those things established, as opposed to needing to scramble to fill that unmet need as summertime is waning and they're getting ready to go into that first year.
So Sam talked a little bit about EFC. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. What is an EFC? Now, before we start into EFCs, I do want to preface this with, you may have heard about a thing called Fasta Simplification that happened in 2020. And simplification isn't going to happen until the 24-25 application year. So none of this is going to change for another 2 years, which is great. So right now, everything is going to be under the EFC, and that will change in a couple years. Those of you who are excited about simplification, I know I'm excited too. That's the process in which they're going to reduce the application from 108 questions to 32-ish questions for financial aid. We're very excited because it means less work for students. But for us right now as practitioners, I just want to make sure everyone knows it's staying the same for a couple more years. So we're going to talk about EFC, and when they change it, don't worry, we're going to have all these trainings on like what the SAI is versus the EFC, and it's going to be awesome. Don't worry. So EFC for right now, this is your expected family contribution. Again, like Sam said, it's not the amount that like Uncle Sam's going to be like knocking on the door saying, hey, I need this amount of money. You don't have to write a check for it, but really it's to look at and assess a family's ability to pay for post-secondary education. It really is just a measure. And a lot of different things play into this. Next slide, please. Actually, sorry, previous slide. We'll go back one just for a second. I apologize. Oop. Forward one more. Just to the EFC one. It's okay, don't worry. So for EFC, just real quickly, we want to make sure that this is really looking at the parent, like if a student's dependent versus independent, it's going to be different. So a dependent student is going to look at the expected family contribution. That's going to include their parents' ability to pay as well when they're under the age of 24 without extenuating circumstances that would allow them to apply for a dependency override. And so these students who are dependent may have a little bit different in that calculation versus our maybe returning adults who are dependent. The other thing about EFC is people will see it and think, if it's zero, it's a full ride and I don't have to worry about anything. And that's not the case. The lower the EFC typically means the higher amount of gift aid a student is going to get or more eligibility for gift aid. But it doesn't mean that they are going to have a full ride that covers every single thing. And so we want to prepare students for the reality that they could have to take out loans or find ways to reduce the cost of their education. Go ahead. And then when students, just a heads up, when families see that EFC, when they see it, when they file financial aid applications, they may not see it on the application itself. They may see the EFC for the first time on the award letter, and it can be very scary to see the words expected family contribution and then that giant number. Again, norm that that's not the number they have to pay. So let's talk about award letters now. This is like the most exciting, other than the admissions letters. We know the admissions letters are the ones that everyone's really excited, but this is the letter the parents are excited for, because this is going to help them to determine how much they're going to be paying for school. And so for the award letter, really what it is it's the cost of attendance. So like those direct costs. And then they're going to look at the cost, like the amount of grants, scholarships, and other gift aid. And then they're going to take how much it costs, how much they might be getting for gift aid, and then the difference, and that's the unmet net cost. So when a student receives an award letter like this is our example, and award letters look different. Every school, some schools, same school, different campuses, different award letters. So this is not where friends share and compare. This is not the time for that, because they're all going to look different. It's based on the student and family situation. And so one student may be getting a different amount than another, and it's because they have different family circumstances. This is where we don't want students to share and compare, because it's not going to make sense. What we want students to do is to look at their award letter, and they're first going to look at like the direct cost of attendance. So it'll have how much it's estimated to cost for them to go to school, and then other estimated costs that they may have to pay. It's going to have their scholarship and the grants that are being offered to them. Now, this award letter may say estimated, and if that's the case, it just means that they are waiting for finalized grades and other things to be able to award certain types of aid that have criteria, or that they're waiting for the student to finish high school. They may have some, I've had students who've had to wait with their final GPA to see if they got final merit scholarships on top. So the student's going to have their offer here, but this, if it says estimated, please remember it can change. So it's not set in stone then. And so if you see estimated on there, it's okay. But if they do change it, you want to be aware of that. Then they're going to show in here, and it can be in any format, of course, the scholarships and grants, and then the loan option. And it's going to tell them typically if they're income eligible for subsidized loans, it'll have subsidized and unsubsidized, and sometimes it'll have parent loans. Again, we want to make sure when they're looking at loans that you are taking subsidized first. Those are the loans that the government's like, hey, don't worry, while you're in school for a short period after, we're going to cover the interest. Those unsubsidized loans are the loans that they take out and the interest starts immediately. So we want to make sure they're taking those subsidized before unsubsidized. You can see part 5 here shows the estimated direct cost after everything has been covered. So this is everything that they're getting, and this might be the amount left over that you need to pay either out of pocket or find other funding sources and additional aid. This can be very scary for families. I don't know about you all, but I'm already getting phone calls from parents saying I had no clue it was going to cost this much for college. There's a couple things to think about. Number one, scholarships is another thing we should norm as part of the financial aid process. It's not about one application, but about a process to help find all the puzzle pieces that are going to pay for your education. The corner pieces are going to be those grants, loans, scholarships, and other type of gift aid. But you have to make sure you're applying for all those. So scholarships are a huge one. There's a lot of scholarship processes opening right now for undergraduate students who are starting next year. I encourage your students, if they see that amount and they are concerned, start applying for scholarships. They can always reach out to the college that they're attending to see if there's any other types of aid that they could be awarded. And then start looking at ways to reduce costs. And then they'll have other aid options available. Now, one thing I want to talk about here is if the student is using VA, like post 9/11 GI Bill, things like that, they always want to check with the school certifying official to ensure that they're in process to receive those funds, but they want to think about how they're going to layer those funds. If the student you're working with knows they want to go to grad school, have them apply for state and federal funds first before tapping that post 9/11 GI Bill, because we know these funds of state and federal can be used in undergrad, but when you get to grad school, finding some sort of grant for graduate school is like finding a unicorn. It's very challenging, not to be discouraging, but like I do this for a living and I paid, I took loans. So it's hard for that graduate school, and we want to reduce that debt all around. So if a student's going to go to graduate school, try to hold some of that post 9/11 GI Bill for graduate school if possible. So there's a lot of different ways to layer aid when you're looking at the award letter and to be mindful of it. So before we go into appeals and revisions, I just want to remind everybody, not everyone's received award letters, and the community colleges haven't even sent them out yet. It's totally fine. Everyone's on different awarding cycles. The school website usually will say like, we're sending award letters on like around this timeline. So you don't have to flood the school with like inquiries of, am I getting my award letter? It's different than an admissions letter. So students think like, if I get my award letter, I'm set. They really are looking for that admissions letter when it comes to that admissions decision, not the financial aid part. They have a little bit of time, have them check their award letters to see when they have to respond by. But the biggest thing is making sure that they respond by the certain date and that they're really mindful of the types of aid that they're taking.
All right. I think one of the best things we can always do as educators is share best practices. So we would love to hear from you all about how your institution has or will inform students about the opportunities to appeal their financial aid award. And I can share some examples that I've used with districts before. And it was little things, right? We don't have to overcomplicate our lives all the time, but it would be things like adding screensavers during that March time when we saw award letters to student computers, or sending notes home, or adding it to the end of a presentation when we did it in October. But also using your resources. WASFA has some amazing ones, and we'll cover them at the end, as well as PSCCN.
And federally, I know that the FAFSA at the bottom of the application right now literally says the first thing before you sign in is you can appeal your award. If your income has decreased, you can appeal your award. And so they're trying to norm that. That has not always been the norm. In fact, there's an issue with the percentage of basically of professional judgments an institution can make, that they have a threshold before like it can trigger like potentially audit situations and things like that. So they have used those as like last circumstances, really to make sure they're providing them to those who need them and being very mindful of that process. But they are letting people know that like there's a lot more who need to apply for this, and then it's a more normal, it's a very much normed process at this point. I would say with the students I'm working with, a third of them are asking me about how to do an appeal at the same time as applying for aid because they know about decreased income in their family. So I think even just norming the conversation, but federally they're even norming it, which is awesome.
All right, so we've talked a little bit about appealing your students' financial aid, but how does that process really work? So say you're working with your student and they've received their award letter and they're disappointed with their financial aid package. Now, there are a couple circumstances that a student can fall under where they would be able to appeal their award letter and potentially be granted more financial aid through the financial aid office. There are some resources that I'll share with you in a second, but this requires a student to write in a letter using, very particular language to make sure that those mechanisms are triggered. Financial aid is an offer from the institution to the student, and as such, the appeal process can be implemented prior to a student choosing to accept that financial aid package. One of the things a student will have to go through is once they've received their financial aid award letters, that once they've selected the institution they want to attend, they'll actually need to go through that award letter and accept the different items found on that letter. And so prior to doing that, a student can send in that appeal and be considered for additional funding. Now, this can be for a variety of reasons, especially over the last couple of years with the pandemic in mind. Change of income for families and households have swung different directions very drastically. And so that can be a great foundation to write an appeal off of. Outside of that, there are a number of other circumstances that students can find themselves in where an appeal letter may be necessary. There are different circumstances within a household where there may be step families or extended families, and that can be a cause for improper information possibly on a financial aid package. And so an appeal letter can be written with regards to that. A change in marital status for the student specifically would make them independent, and so they would need to get reconsidered for their award letter. So there can be an appeal letter written for that. And so point being, there are a number of different circumstances that a student can submit an appeal letter under. So it can be helpful to have resources in order to address that for your student. Next slide, please. Perfect. So federal and state law and policy outline the parameters for financial aid officers as they're going through this process with students. As I said, a couple of different circumstances that are common for students to need this process would be loss of income, medical bills that could possibly impact a student or a family's ability to provide financial support, or unusually high childcare costs. These are all different reasons why a student may need a change of their financial aid. And so as they're going through this process, there are a couple of different terms that also may be thrown around at them through this process. One of them, in addition to the appeal, being a professional judgment by the institution. A professional judgment is an opportunity for a financial aid officer to look at the student's circumstance and be able to overwrite their financial aid award letter to include additional support and additional funding that they wouldn't typically be eligible for. Let's go to the next slide. So financial aid administrators can exercise that professional judgment. This can typically happen when we see students that may have no contact with their parent or guardian who should be providing that financial aid information. If there are any safety concerns in there, we want to make sure that we are protecting our students and making sure that they're going through this process with without having to go through any unnecessary traumas or unnecessary dangerous situations because of no contact order. So in that instance, that's where a professional judgment would come in, as opposed to the need to write an appeal letter. It's important to keep in mind, as students are going through this process, they're submitting financial aid information to each institution, and each institution is packaging their financial aid separately. So as they appeal through these processes, they're going to need to do this with each of the institutions. It's a little bit inconvenient. It's a lot of bit time consuming, but with these different resources, it can be made a lot easier to submit the same documentation to each of those institutions. Now, as a student's working through this process, there are a couple of steps they're going to want to take. First, they're going to want to determine their eligibility by reviewing all of the forms and materials that they're receiving from their financial aid office. In addition to that, whether it's right after reviewing or while they're reviewing, they're going to want to get in contact with the financial aid office as well to start that dialogue with them, to let the financial aid office know, these are the steps that I'm taking, these are the concerns that I have, and these are the reasons why. What can also be helpful in doing that is that a financial aid office can be made aware of those circumstances and also offer up different scholarship opportunities that the student may not be aware of, or it may be something that's not commonly promoted to first-year students. So there's a lot of good that can come with providing that information to the financial aid office. With that being said, a lot of times these are sensitive conversations that a student will need to have with the financial aid office. So there can be a need for a trusted person in the room with them or alongside them as they have these conversations. And that's where you, as their points of contact, can be a helpful support and resource for them. One of the other things a student will want to consider is the award letter and the reason for appeal versus the time it will take to go through that process. It can be a pretty lengthy process, and some dates and deadlines can creep up on the student. So they'll want to make sure, again, to have that dialogue with the financial aid office to make sure they're not going to miss anything, as well as to ensure that this appeal process is going to be something that's beneficial for them. Go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, one of the great resources that we have available, and this is also included on the Padlet, is a resource called Student Swift. Now, Student Swift is a website that generates a bunch of different templates depending on the student's circumstance to kind of help provide that language to students and families to articulate what they're going through, what they're experiencing, and why there is a need for additional financial support. Go to the next slide. Now, students can access this and create documents that are kept on their account. And these can be anything from, dangerous work or family environments, students experiencing homelessness, a change in household circumstance due to incarceration, any number of things can be found on those FormSwift templates. We pop over to the next slide. Students are given these outlines where they can fill in their personal information, and then it loads it right into the template, giving that financial aid language that the officers need to see in order to trigger those different resources for students to have access to. In addition to that, it creates a great resource for students to be able to go back and retrieve those documents to send to other institutions as well. And it creates a great paper trail for a student just in case there is a need to provide any documentation around why they received more financial aid, or if in a previous financial aid year they received more and then the next year they're receiving less and they still need that additional support, they can have a paper trail and those previous forms they submitted to submit again those following years, because as we know, they'll have to reapply each year for financial aid. So having this resource handy is a great way to help students through that process without needing to drum up too much of the personal details from the student. This can also be a great way to share out information to students with regards to the different circumstances that they can get appeals for. So that first slide had a bunch of those different dots showing all of the different circumstances. If a student might not be as forthcoming because it is a sensitive subject for them, you can share this resource with them and they can look over the different appeal letters that are available to them so that they can self-support through this process. Now I'll hand it off to Amy.
Thank you. There are actions you can take as an educator or a community partner to help students with the appeal process, whether it's verification or the actual appeal process. Students are often asked to share their stories of trauma in order to prove the need for funding. This can have a big impact on their perception of higher education or themselves. So be mindful of imposter syndrome that students may be experiencing while going through these processes. Like I said, students are often asked to prove their trauma. An appeal may be a result of a change in family status, homelessness, their employment, or other special circumstances, or sometimes even death. This is also a tough position for staff, as they can be placed in meditating between student and the financial aid office. So you can support a student by helping facilitate their communication with the financial aid office as an additional contact for the student. And just keeping in mind, depending on their situation, they already may be dealing with the law. So as much as we like to have students advocate for themselves, sometimes we know that they do need that extra support depending with what they're dealing with. And that's really where you guys can all come in. So some key takeaways: appeals are available, but they are typically reserved for special cases. They can be time-sensitive processes and can require coaching, also a lot of patience. And I think that goes with anything in the financial aid process. Appeals are not a silver bullet. Even if you are able to revise award, there may need additional funding that you may need, and we'll talk a little bit about what. All right, so we are going to test your knowledge. So there are 4 questions there. I'll give everyone a couple minutes to answer in the chat, yes or no, and then I'll go ahead and give everyone the answers. So for the first one, it is: family just found out they will need to move grandma into an assisted living facility and will incur the majority of the cost. Should they consider an appeal? Yes or no? Okay. Number 2, family home is being treated for mold and the family will be living in a hotel for at least 5 months. Should they consider an appeal? All right, number 3, the family must pay for a double knee replacement surgery for their family dog. All right. Number 4, parent is planning on not paying for student education expenses. All right, and last one, parent is expecting a decrease in income due to job loss or reduction.
Eileen, you're on mute.
I'll go ahead and put the answers in the chat. And if anyone has any questions as to like, wait, why are we doing that for this and not that, we are happy to answer those as well. So I'll give everyone a quick chance to skim over those before we move forward.
I think it's really important to be mindful of the fact that when students start in college, they will be protected by FERPA, which means that their records can't be accessed by a parent. We noted this in Running Start because it's the first time parents are like, wait, I can't get my students' records. And so we just want to be very mindful in the appeal process, any of these times that a parent's trying to access records. In the appeals, it's usually providing information, but trying to access the record, a student will have to have a release on file for anyone trying to access their information on their behalf. Just as a heads up. All
right, next slide, Linda. All right. In the chat, we would like to hear from you if you have any award letter programming planned. What resources can you make available to students supporting with selecting a financial aid package? What is the process for providing this information? And I will share that there are amazing, and again, you guys can always connect with us, that talks about having those conversations, right, when it comes to taking out loans, because the decision really is with the student and the family, but we can always help with making an informed decision. And that sometimes is like, you know, when you're in high school, I don't think you realize what interests you may be taking out, or other things like that. And I know for some of our documented students, that sometimes means taking out private loans. And so how do we have those difficult conversations with them and help them navigate that they may not have access to this, but they can do that. And all of that information is out there as well. So we'll be sharing that. But if there's anything amazing that you all do, we would love to hear from you as well.
I know we have people from the colleges here as well. So if there's a process that you use or a resource that you share with your students, please feel free to share that as well. And if you don't have the resources, man, the PSCCN toolkit we'll talk about shortly. There's a lot of places to get those. If you're thinking, oh my gosh, we don't have those resources, no worries. We got them. We got your back. We have lots of resources that are happy to talk about them, and we'll right here at the end. But before we jump into resources, I want a couple more financial aid steps, just little things not to forget before we finish our training today. So number one, scholarships. Students might be receiving outside scholarships. Awesome. Those are scholarships not provided by the institution they're attending. So these can be scholarships from your schools, from your communities. When students are applying for scholarships, a lot of them are going to ask for the EFC. That is to determine if a student has unmet need that scholarship could go towards. So even if the student isn't applying for financial aid funds, they may still need to apply for financial aid in order to receive their EFC to apply for scholarships. So commonly I hear from students, I'm not going to get any sort of scholarships, and I'm not going to get any financial aid, so I'm just not going to apply. Have them apply so they can get their EFC to apply for outside scholarships. Now, if a student receives scholarships, not only are you going to high-five them because they got a scholarship, but you're also going to remind them they need to reach out to their financial aid office, because that's not part of the calculation that they have so far. And again, they're not psychic, so they don't know the student has received an outside scholarship. They contact the financial aid office or the bursar's office. It usually tells them in the financial aid award if they receive additional aid. And then what happens is they will connect the scholarship providers to the bursar's office to make sure that those funds are received. It also allows them to mark off, sometimes they have a sheet called, it's a list of holds for students so they don't get dropped for non-payment. Sometimes then they can manually add that to that list so the student's not dropped for non-payment. They can put a code in there. And the other piece is, if they get scholarship displacement. So that means that they have received enough scholarships that it's displacing some of their aid. The first thing to look at is cost of attendance. Maybe the student said they're not living on campus, but they now want to live on campus and they have the financial ability to do so. Then they need to adjust their application to say so. They also need to make sure that their scholarship, if they get a lot of extra funds for scholarships, I really like asking if they can use it another quarter, or if they want to go summer, try to push that money down the line, because there's only so much they can have for unmet need. So the other thing is when I've worked in financial aid, the first thing we'll do is remove loans first when we find that there's gift aid there to reduce the barrier and the burden for the student. So they typically do that, but the student wants to make sure that they've received scholarships, that it's coming off of their loans, if possible, instead of their gift aid. The last piece is if a student receives a scholarship, let's say they receive a scholarship, and like I had a student that got a $10,000 scholarship and they got that money as cash, which I was like, wow, that's wonderful. But it put the student, because they had no longer met the cost of attendance, they had additional funds beyond that. Those now became income and taxable. The student wanted to think about, do I receive these funds, which may potentially income-wise push me out of eligibility for other programs next year? So we really had to work with the student to make sure. It was the first time I've been doing this for almost over 20 years now. It was the first time I had a student go above their cost of attendance, and that did become considered income. And so you want to make sure if a student's in that situation to be mindful of that. Next. And that student, they did adjust the cost of attendance. The student decided, I'm living on campus and I'm getting a private room. And she did, she loved it. She was able to study and no one was loud. So the other thing is the process isn't over. And so really you want to make sure in this process, and Eileen, you're going to go over this, but you may think that it's done and it may not be because of those little things. So there's a couple things to be mindful of.
Yeah, you have to make sure you let the school know you're going there, right? Your student may have applied to multiple schools, and so it's time to inform them of your decision, as well as select your aid distribution. And it can vary depending on the institution. Usually it's sometimes like a card they'll have, or it can be like, I know some institutions used to do checks. I don't know if that's still being used. I know they like suggest, please don't write a check because it'll get lost in the mail. And they'll also directly go into your account. Of course, usually the aid distribution usually pays tuition, and then the remaining will go to the student. Also, they may be required fees or payments that the student has to pay for. But you can always ask to have them wait until your money is distributed, or sometimes depending on what exactly the fee is, and if your student is like college-bound scholarship eligible, they can get sometimes fees waived. That's only with like admissions things. Usually it's not with like class fees.
They can also, if they're receiving aid, they know they got financial aid, but they're hearing about these deposits, $200 there, $300. Those can add up real quickly and become barriers. They can reach out to their financial aid office and say, can I have those deposits taken from my financial aid amount? And so before a student is trying to scramble to come up with those funds, have them check with their financial aid office first.
Mhm. Next slide, please. And then we also want to touch base on emergency aid. This is a one-time aid typically provided by the school's foundation, not the financial aid office. And this is for smaller amounts and sometimes provided on a short-term loan. This really varies on the institution the school is deciding to go on. But even I know, like, for example, Green River College has some like book loan programs for students. So that may be a way to, save some money while they're waiting for that aid to come in. And so I would say use your resources and connect with the institutions and the handbook. It has all of this information, and I think everyone is more than ready to help students when it comes to making that transition. And I see that.
Eileen, you're mute again.
Oh, Carol, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I just had a question on that last slide. Is there any way to go back? It was about the refunding any extra amount. Yeah. So, okay. I just wanted to get that one part about the refund.
Yeah, anything above the direct costs, like tuition, room and board, anything that's left over after that is dispersed to the student in a multitude of ways.
Okay.
To give kind of an example of that, I know for me, when I went off to school, I was a part of the College Success Foundation back when they had a scholarship program available. I was also on an athletic scholarship for track and field. And then I received all of the other financial aids from applying for the FAFSA. And so all of that combined left me at a point where I had a refund available. And that was given to me by a check at the end of each semester. And so a little bit of coaching too around how to kind of use that money wisely, as opposed to not going out and getting a new Xbox game like Sam did. It could be also very helpful for students as well.
So when they're awarded, everything goes in their account, and then whatever is left over, they get a check sent to them.
Or a debit card, whatever they sign up for.
Okay.
They can sign up for the debit card or the check, or like there's a multitude of ways that I've had students, whatever they're most comfortable with. But yeah, it's dispersed back to them.
They'll also want to be sure to like check the rules around the different financial aids that they're receiving, because some of the scholarships or funding that they'll receive will say, a last in scholarship, or it'll cover up to the cost of tuition. So there are some circumstances where it'll look like a student may receive a refund check, but not actually receive one because they've reached that cap.
Oh, okay. It's good to know. Thank you. Hope you're still enjoying your Xbox.
Okay, let's talk resources. So we've talked a lot about like all the things that we need to do for students, but here are the things that we can do for you. And we'll start out with the amazing toolkit. I love this thing. Oh, and this is on your Padlet, y'all.
So we do have financial aid toolkit, and this has some resources around like what should a student do with their award letter, what if a student does not think their award letter is enough, where can students and families get help understanding and comparing award letters. We also have, well, I'll pass it over to Dinda to talk about what other items we have.
You're muted, Dinda.
I know. I am sorry about that. So we can find common scenarios and financial aid strategies, resources for family and students as far as like PowerPoint presentations, worksheets and activities. We can also find like where they can find education and outreach and communications and things like that. And then for the promotional materials, like Eileen mentioned a little bit earlier about like things that we can, simple things that we can do to remind students that they need to apply financial aid. So we have like a banner that you can put in your schools, like event flyers that you can use to distribute, posters that, yeah, you can put out too, stickers that you can put on your computer, laptop, computers, or the wallpaper on your desktop. So there's little things that we can do to help students always know that, remind students that they have to complete their financial aid, and if they do, to be looking out for all the various steps that we have talked about, as far as looking out for the award letters, verification and all that. And then the college knowledge, which is a 24 digital handout covering the most requested college readiness topics. These books are available in English, Spanish, Somali, Russian, and Vietnamese. And then there's also a college transition checklist available too.
And then 12-year campaign, we also have resources as well. The college knowledge books that Dinda just talked about, we have them printed in English. You can order them from us, and we're happy to send you as many as you need for your students. The only rule we have is, like, if you're an independent person, like, or a company charging students for support in the financial aid process, we are unable to provide you with free resources. It's just one of those things. So if you're a paid for consultant, we encourage you, like, there's a lot of ways you can volunteer and use resources, but if you're charging students, we are unable to provide you with those. But we do have so many printed resources, postcards. If you go to the next slide, there's postcards that say you can't get financial aid if you don't apply, which is true, and it's in 5 languages. These are the top 5 spoken languages in K-12 homes. And then if you go to the next slide, you also can use our student Padlet. You can, or we have our Padlet here. We have a student Padlet as well, that you can use to share with your students, which I think it's nice to be able to have something to just give to them that they have access to after they graduate as well, and I'm putting that in the chat, because some students will decide during the summer they want to go to college. And then the next slide. Loans are scary. I mean, I know this as someone who's a consumer of my own student loan, but we have a student loan advocate to help demystify loans and allow students to be real strong consumers of their own student loans. And so there's classes they can take and someone they can work with. This is not just for current students. If you have a student loan and you have questions about all these new forgiveness plans, check with our office. They are there to support you. Next slide. Just some guiding questions to think about as we leave here today, before we move on to evaluation. And we don't have time to go over everything, but just to think about these as you're working with students. And think about the resources we have. And if you're missing a resource, if you go to the next slide, we have all of our contact information. So if you're like, oh my gosh, there was an amazing resource PSCCN had, but I can't remember what it was, but it was a checklist, you can always contact us. We're happy to help provide resources and ways to support you in this work. And then Dinda, I know we have an evaluation. Are we sending that afterwards?
Yes, we'll send it after with the email that we're going to put together with all the resources that we mentioned in this presentation.
So yeah, if you were screenshotting the whole time, don't worry, we're going to send you those resources. It's fine if you have like a whole saved page of them. We'll also send them to you as well.
Thank you so much all for your time. I will myself hang around a couple minutes if there are any questions that you have. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for attending. Again, we'll be here for questions. I'm really excited to help support the work that you're doing. I know that it's not easy. There's a lot of work for us to do in financial aid, but we're all going to do it together with collective impact to support our students. And I'm really excited to have that opportunity with you. If you need anything, reach out to us.